All right. All right. Good afternoon. So we're starting a little bit early, just a few 5 minutes early, just to kind of get things going and making sure that everything is working just fine. Hey, Chris, how you doing today?
I'm very fine, Tracy. Good to see you again.
Yes, it's always a pleasure to see you, Chris, and especially to get into these conversations. I
Sure.
always look forward to these conversations that we're going to have today. Um, but since I wanted to get on just a few minutes early and just kind of see if we can get give people some time to log on. Um,
Sure.
what are some of the what? Oh, we were talking about Moore's law, right? Because that's what we're talking
Oh,
about.
that was earlier. Yeah, we were talking about Moore's law. Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll
we were
get to
talking
that.
about
Get to that later in the presentation. Yeah.
yes, but what we plan on talking about
Oh,
today
the
is
topics today. Yes, I'm sorry.
yes.
Yes, so very good. Yeah, so we're gonna start out talking about the ruling that a judge in Texas made on the FTC, Fair Trade Commission, Federal Trade Commission rather,
Yes.
on the issue of non-compete agreements. Right. So this had to do with employers using and issuing non-compete agreements, and uh, this is a contentious issue, right? Because a lot of judges don't like them. There's like 16 states that don't allow them, and so I'm going to talk about a development in that rule because, of course, that rule was published and it is
Hmm.
set to go into effect on September 4th. But there were a bunch of lawsuits that were filed around that. And a judge in Texas that was kind of early along, there were two Texas plaintiffs, one being the Texas Chamber of Commerce, that got out in front of that. And therefore, she had set expectations. She would issue a preliminary ruling on June 30, which she has. So I want to talk about that ruling, its impact, and then what I think, what I look at happening in the next leg of this. I also want to talk about the Fair Labor Standards Act. As we all know, there were changes
Yes.
made to the salary floor. The
Yes.
first leg of that, it was a two-step process, remember, right? So the first step was that everybody had to be at 48,888, I think it was, yeah, on July 1. And then the next leg of this, taking it up to the eventual floor,
Yes.
falls on January 1. So I
Yes.
want to talk about, more than anything, not so much the amounts or the dates, because I think people know that by now and that's been well discussed. I feel what's not been discussed that has huge implications for HR professionals is the strategic implication of the way this rule is designed, in particular, the portion of the rule that sets up an escalator whereby every 3 years, the analysis will be taken. And if there is an adjustment to be made, it will be automatically made. So no more rulemaking. Congress isn't involved. It's just on autopilot. And that's never happened before in the history of the rules. So I want to talk that's a strategic change. So I want to talk
Yes.
about that because there are huge implications for that. And then I want to wrap it up with everything that's been going on in the last week regarding President Biden and the discussions about will he be the Democrat nominee for president? Will he not? There's been a lot of
Yes.
information rattling around in the news. I want to clarify some of that and put that into
Okay.
perspective. And the reason I want to do that is because from a policy standpoint, it matters a lot to HR who is president in the next 4 years, right? And so that's no
Yes.
small thing in terms of how that perspective is set. So I want to clarify that mystery because there's a lot of
Confusion and
a lot of confusion in this right now, and I want to bring clarity to that. So that's the agenda for today.
well, then that's awesome. But I just want to amplify what you just said, and before I start into before we roll out with the disclaimers, but how the presidential, whoever is the president, really does impact the way that HR professionals work. And I think that and I think that to some degree, and hopefully we can kind of tie into why HR professionals need to really get involved. I think that sometimes a lot of us, we kind of look at it as political. I'm not going to say us because not really me, right? But I'm going to say us because I am part of the community. So I'll just say us. sometimes, you know, we're afraid to get into this space, and we think as HR professionals, we'll leave it to those that get involved in politics to kind of take care of things, and why that voice really matters, right? Finding your HR advocacy voice, like really get to that. So I'm looking forward to the topics we're going to be talking about today, Chris. But before we jump in, I definitely want to make sure that I share the disclaimer, right? And the reason why is because I am the Director of Government Affairs for IndySHRM, and Chris Schrader is the Director of Government Affairs at the state level for HR Indiana SHRM. And however, we've come together and collaborated on this podcast, you know, to be able to bring real information that demystifies everything that we hear in the news, right? Because sometimes, you know, what's going on in the news is not necessarily true, but we are not providing advice. We are not telling you what to do, how to think. We want to equip you with information that gives you the power to think for yourself and decide, okay, how do you want to show up in this space? Because we all need to advocate, but we're all going to do it differently. So it's about finding that voice. So without further ado, let's jump into the salary.
Actually, no, I want to talk about the FTC first. Yeah.
You want to start? Okay, let's start with the FTC.
Exactly. Yeah. So the
Fair Trade Commission,
as we all know, the FTC announced that they were going to jump into the middle of what at the time was a legislative process that is still ongoing regarding a couple of bills, one in the House and one in the Senate. They did somewhat different things, but the gist of it was they wanted to significantly curtail, not completely eliminate, neither bill totally eliminated, but significantly curtail the use of non-compete agreements by employers. And some employers use these and some don't for a variety of reasons. And I was working both the House and the Senate, you know, in the Indiana delegations, trying to make certain that the bills did not throw out the baby with the bathwater, meaning just completely eliminate use of non-competes, because from an HR perspective, and I know a number of HR practitioners work at companies that have non-competes, we have them use them for extraordinarily legitimate purposes, which is not to say that there can't be employers who use them capriciously, or overuse them is probably the best way to put it. They overuse them. And I will stipulate that happens, right? And I told all the congressional offices when I was talking about this late last year, that that was the case, right? That I completely acknowledge that there was probably overuse, maybe even misapplication, but don't throw it out for because that'll have huge implications for how many people get opportunities for succession plan, development opportunities. This will really mess up companies that have proprietary information that is very unique, and if it got out, trouble. And so don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. And then the FTC hopped in, federal, and they decided to just make it, nuke all of them. Just eliminate them all. Just can't have them. So you can't produce any new ones, and the old ones are all dead. So it was extraordinary. It was the most extreme version of anything you saw in Congress. And I was very concerned at the time because I said, and it's true, that a federal agency can legally make a rule from a calendar standpoint far faster than a piece of legislation can get passed through both houses and signed into law by the president.
And we saw that this year, right? We saw that.
Right. So the FTC hopped in and got in, and heck, these bills haven't even had committee hearings yet, right? They received committee assignments. They haven't received committee hearings yet, and already this rule is out. And so when they proposed the rule, I commented on that. I, made many of the same arguments, I've been making consistently, right, to the legislature. And that obviously really cut a lot of ice with the FTC because they didn't take any of those recommendations and put forth just a really nuclear bomb of an order. Immediately upon publishing an order. So the way the process works, when an order is published, it gets published, and then there is an effective date that's out in the future. Okay.
Yes.
So this rule, when it was published, was set to go in effect, and it was stated in a number of days. But what it lands on is September 4th. So that's all anybody needs to know. It's September
Okay.
4th, the effective date.
Okay.
Immediately, there are like 16 lawsuits filed, right? And so
Yes.
two of the early ones were in the state of Texas. And one of those litigants was the Texas Chamber of Commerce. And so that landed on the docket of Judge Ada Brown. She is the district court judge for the Southern District of Texas. And so when she got the docket and they heard initial arguments, she then set out a date of September 30, June 30.
Yeah, June 30. Yeah.
June 30 as to a date when she would issue preliminary findings. Okay. Now, at that time, that could have gone in any different directions. Remember, this is a federal judge. This is not just a local Texas state judge. This is a federal judge. And so they have great sweep, right? So from my standpoint, I didn't know what to expect, what she would do on September 30. What she ended up doing was basically issuing a preemptive injunction against the rule going to effect solely for the plaintiffs in the case. Okay. So she did not go say, hey, listen, it's preliminary injunction nationwide. Didn't say that.
Nationwide. Yeah. So those that, brought the
preliminary injunction for Texas. Didn't even say that.
No, just for them.
Just these two plaintiffs.
Okay.
And then she said, then by August 30, no later than August 30, I will issue a finding of what is basically called a merits disposition, is what's called a merits disposition. And this is where we expect to find out what she does at that point. Now, my personal expectation is that she will come out and stop it nationwide. And the reason I say that is the grounds by which she found to issue the injunction for the plaintiffs in the case. And bluntly put, she has found that it is unconstitutional. She says nothing in terms of how the FTC was set up originally. Congress did not grant them this power. And accordingly, they don't have the ability to take the power, right? You can't take the power. She said that's an unconstitutional act because that's an undelegated power. Okay. So undelegated power. So meaning delegated by either Congress or the Constitution. So
if the Congress would have said, we authorize the FTC.
Congress can delegate, right? Congress can delegate responsibility, right, for some right. But when you see something, so they're saying nowhere within the FTC's writ, right, of what it has duty and responsibility for, do you find the authority to do this? And therefore, by trying to do it, that's the unconstitutional act. That's an unconstitutional, right, taking of an undelegated power. So she nukes it on the basis of that. Then she goes to town on the FTC's arguments, and I mean, just bang, bang, bang. If you read, I encourage you to read her findings. But
so then, where could, if you don't mind, if you can put it in the chat.
The site.
What is it?
Just Google U.S. District Court for Southern Texas.
Oh, okay. Well, then there you go. So Google U.S. District Southern Court of Texas.
U.S. District Court for Southern Texas.
Oh, U.S. District Court for Southern Texas.
Google that, and then that'll take you to their site, and then probably be some clicking to find it. I'm sure it's probably.
Well, here's what we'll promise. Anybody watching the video, if you go to the site and you start clicking, find it, definitely reach out.
You'll definitely find it.
We'll find it.
But anyway, but be that as it may, she basically tore apart all of their arguments.
Because I'm like,
she just shredded them.
Okay.
And so,
what are some key what are some key points?
Well, one of the things was, so the FTC was basically arguing they had the right to make the rule. And she said, well, yeah, you
Okay.
got the right to make, you have the right to make rules. You certainly do. As an agency, you do. But what kind of rulemaking did you carry out? For instance, you didn't consider any alternatives to the action that you took, and you took the most extreme action. I mean, coming from a judge, that's like slapping you back and forth, right? I mean, to an agency.
So I'm going to ask you a question just to make sure that I'm following correctly. So then usually agencies have that the open period for public commenting.
Okay, so you're talking about an aspect of rulemaking, right? So
okay,
the way rulemaking basically goes, you got several milestones, right? So you publish a proposed rule, and that goes out. It's proposed, and then you open for public comment. Now, you could do it a couple of different ways, right? You can do just pure public comment, which is how they do it 99% of the time. Now, the Department of Labor, when it came to the action they took on raising the salary floor, they actually went the extra mile of having what were called listening sessions. And so they invited people who were identified as stakeholders. So you had to be invited to that. That isn't like public comment where any
so
public can comment. So that was by invitation only. And for some reason, they consider me a stakeholder, so I was invited.
Well, that's awesome. That's why we're talking, Chris.
Yeah, so I got on, and I told them, and I told them categorically why they shouldn't do what they were planning to do. And once again, it had no impact. But the they did reduce the floor. It was at 80 when they started.
Yes.
They wanted 80, so they did come down on the number, but the rest of it, yeah. Anyway.
So then what?
Then you have, but you
what
do the
got
public
them?
period. You do the public period, and then that agency is obligated, no kidding, under law, obligated to read every single comment. Obligated. So this is one of the reasons why there's a long period of time between them. So they close the public comment period, and then it just goes months, right, until you hear anything, because they have to read. You have to read every single one of those and take those into account to see if they'll change the rule. And so one of the things the judge said is like, look, you got a lot of public content to the negative, and yet you went with the most extreme. So that doesn't make me feel very good about you considering the public comment. So So like I said, she just basically shredded.
Why did the FTC, you take it upon themselves to go this route?
I personally think, well, I don't think honest to goodness, this was not, I don't think this was originally the FTC's idea. This started in Congress. So the Senate version of the bill on non-competes, that is co-sponsor or not co-sponsor. He signed on. He's a co-sponsor. Senator Young from Indiana, co-sponsor. Senator Braun is not. That Senate bill identifies the FTC as the enforcement agency for that act, for that law. Now, the House version of it identifies the Department of Labor as the enforcement agency for that act. Okay, so there's differences between the Senate and House versions, because there almost always is, right? So there's variations. I personally like the House version better, although I think it needs work. I think the Senate version is junk, but that's my opinion. But in any event, neither one of them are.
It doesn't really help HR. You feel like it doesn't really help us.
The Senate version throws out the baby with the bathwater. The Senate version is probably the closest to what the FTC just did. The House version. The House version is like, look, there are going to be cases where this makes sense, right? So I'll get to that in a minute. But at any rate, so in the rulemaking process, you do this proposed rule, then there's public comment, then they have to read them, and then they publish the final rule. And when they publish a final rule, then they tell you the effective date, right? And all of that is rule bound. So how many days there are, exact number of days, calendar days between the publishing of the final rule and the effective date of the final rule, all that is choreographed, right? That you're just following rulemaking process. And so she did not, it wasn't like she told them they had a technical difficulty in terms of the process that they followed.
Okay.
She just said she didn't think they paid attention, right? And that they did it wrong. So not from a process standpoint, but just from a logic standpoint. So, but at any rate, the point I'm trying to make there is she said it was unconstitutional, and then she tore their arguments apart. That's like telling you and the horse you rode on, get out of here.
You
right?
can just get out of here.
Yeah.
So then how does that impact us?
Which leads me to conclude that when she does something on August 30, she's going to nuke the whole thing and basically say, no, you can't for these reasons. And then they'll have to decide what to do. But I think the FTC got the idea from the Senate bill. I don't think the FTC was really thinking about making the rule until the Senate bill identified them as the one to be the enforcement agency. Because keep in mind, FTC does not get involved in labor arrangements. Labor arrangements are basically the DOL and the NLRB.
So when we think about perspectives from different, we think about this from different perspectives. So as a small business owner, as a micro business owner, as an entrepreneur versus an HR professional for possibly for a bigger organization, or a smaller, or what does that look like? Like, what does the FTC's regulation do? Like if it's
well, basically it would just eliminate non-competes at all. You couldn't have them anymore, and you couldn't enforce any that you had. And so the practical implication for any company would be, of course, they're just null and void, and you can't do anything about it. And so my point is that for a lot of businesses don't have these instruments, right? Or some have non-disclosure confidentiality agreements that people sign. Those are common. The non-compete element less common, but nonetheless, these are tools that businesses use to protect their interests, right? I mean, there's a tension there, right? And so in Indiana, judges don't like non-competes very much at all. And because they view it as restraint of trade. And I would say that's where Senator Young comes from, fervently. Senator Young believes is flat out it's a restraint of trade. Somebody should be able to earn a living, and the last employer shouldn't keep them from getting a job if they're the last employer, right? And
I really wholeheartedly believe with that. Like, I really do believe that, we've got to get to the point where, but
I'm not saying he doesn't have a reasonable argument. And I'm also not saying that there aren't, 16 odd states that agree with him, right?
But it's a tool.
I get it. I've always said I get it, but under certain circumstances, it actually makes sense. And so one of the things that I told, and I was working on in the House version, and the House version had the language. Now, I can't remember if they had it and then took it out. I lost track. Right? Because the FTC started making the rule, and so my attention shifted to that, right? Because I knew that was going to get out long before the bills moved.
Because they work quicker than Congress. Yeah.
One of the common ones, you'll see us at large companies. I'll give it. This happened to me, right? When I was working for a company that was bought by Pearson Publishing, very large global corporation, and they got it in their head that they wanted to put me in their management development silo because they had identified me as someone who had potential and maybe would end up as a senior executive in Pearson someday. And so that's how big corporations do it, right? They don't want to have to go out and hire from the outside. They grow their own because they can. And so one of the things that goes along with that is you're going to be afforded developmental opportunities, which means you're going to advance, right?
Yes.
And they pretty much laid out the path for me. I knew I'd be working in accounting. I knew I would probably go back into marketing. I mean, I had a really good idea of what that would be. Plus, I would get other developmental opportunities. They would support a master's degree. I mean, there was a whole bunch of stuff around that. And in return for that, I agreed, first of all, not to leave for a minimum of 3 years. So I signed a 3-year commitment, number one. The second thing was non-competition. I couldn't take everything I learned at Pearson and go run it over one of their competitors with everything I had learned.
Because they've invested in your development.
Yeah, because from Pearson's
highly invested.
Even if you don't tell them anything, you are a more developed executive now.
Yes.
On our dime. right? And,
Yes, and that is a strong point.
right.
Yes,
And so,
yes.
so I signed the non-competition agreement. And then if I hadn't have left, I did leave.
Before the 3 years.
I ended up leaving. Yes. No. I left at my third.
Oh, okay.
I ended up leaving because they couldn't tell me for sure where I was going to go. And I'd been in accounting for 2 years and I just hated it. And wanted out, and they wouldn't let me out. So I didn't re-up because they couldn't tell me either where I'd be going next or when I would. It was kind of their whole attitude was, we'll call you, don't call us, kind of thing. And it was a big global corporation, right? I was a
Yes.
tiny little piece of their operation. I mean, so
Yes,
they lose one person, big whoop, right?
So I guess it makes sense.
But anyway, I also signed, had I lasted, had I persisted beyond those 3 years, I was going to have to sign another agreement that said that if I left inside that band of time, I would owe them money.
Well, yes.
So,
I mean, yes, I've been part of that where I've had to enforce that.
That's what's referred to as a clawback, right?
And that's what I did not like with that. With, I felt like, yes, I agree. Like if a company invests in your development,
right.
I think that it's only fair to at least use those years on that organization,
Right. And so my point is that in larger organizations, and maybe even some mid-sized ones do versions of these, but that's a very different situation, right? The cost involved, the investment in time, the investment in energy. Executive times, like I said, I was going to be, I was placed in a position that any number of people could have gotten, but because I was in that silo, Pearson was like, nope, moving that piece over here. And nobody gets to say boo, right? There's just boom. Yes. Global VP of HR says you're here, you're here. So, that's how big corporations do it. And so from my standpoint, the things they were putting in front of me were pretty rational because they were putting a lot of stuff on the table for me and giving me a lot of opportunity.
Yes.
That they would be out of pocket if I just flat out walked very deep in. And so these were the kinds of things I was talking about. Just don't nuke all those arrangements, because what happens is, what I told them was, you do that, and here's what's going to happen. Because the companies can't leverage that and can't protect against that risk, the only way they can mitigate the risk that they have is to offer fewer opportunities. So instead of offering it to 50 people, you only offer it to 15 because you can only afford, see what I mean?
To do that. Yeah.
That's the only way to mitigate that risk.
So what I'm hearing from this FTC, because I do wear different hats and I'm different roles. Like, so in HR, I can definitely see how it is a great tool in situations. You definitely want to be able to leverage that, because you definitely just don't want to pour money into somebody who's walking right out the door.
Yeah, you have to.
But at the same time, when we're thinking about ICs, when we're working with independent contractors, I think that's where I look at the non-competes, and then I look at the non-competes and I say, well, this is where it impacts me differently.
I have run into that too in my own practice, right? I worked for a client one time. I think it was for a period of like 2 months. I think it was 2 or 3 month long, pretty in-depth project. And one of the things they put on the table was, hey, while you're engaged with us, we don't want you to be engaged with anybody who could, you list out all these companies' competitors. And I said, well, I'm certainly willing to sign a non-disclosure agreement that says I won't tell them anything, but what you're telling me is I can't go and get other business where otherwise I would be able to go get it. And they said, yeah, that's exactly what we're saying. And
because some of them are bold and
I said, and is this a deal break element of the contract, right? Is this, you have to have this or it doesn't go forward? And they said, yeah, you have to sign. And I said, well, then in that case, I'm willing to sign on the condition that my fees go up to X level, because I'm taking economic opportunity off the table in order to serve you.
I love that.
Right. So I just raised my, and they accepted that. They accepted more money in return for that.
See, and I love that.
And I was okay doing that because it was clear it was important to him. So if it was important to him, I concluded they would likely be willing to pay, and they were.
See, and thank you for doing that. And then we can move on to the next one. But I wanted
Yeah,
to clarify that because I know within the HR community, we don't just have HR professionals that work for employee, that are employees, but we have HR professionals that are running their own business. And so being
yeah,
able
that's
to
right.
understand the different perspectives when
Yeah.
it comes to the non-competes and how we can support it as a tool, but
Yeah.
definitely not as a
Yeah,
tool to
I
be
would
used
say
against
if
independent
you get a
contractors.
non-compete shoved into you and shoved in front of you, and that's going to take you out of the running for business in a certain sector, you need to be compensated for that. That's all. Now, do expect to get a non-disclosure agreement. I've signed so many of those.
Oh, well, yeah, and I agree, and I
Yeah,
think that
yeah.
that's very
So let's
fair.
go ahead.
So
Let's
then
go ahead.
what implications does HR have to worry about that? Is there anything that
So
HR
here,
represents?
well, for here, no, there's no. Well, we can't do
Nothing.
anything.
Okay.
We can't do anything. All I'm saying is pay attention. August 30 is when the next ruling is likely to come out, and then we'll find out whether or not this thing is a go or not.
Oh, go
And
or
if
not.
it is
And
a
then
go, the live date is September 4th.
September 4th.
So
And then that means HR professionals need
needs
to
to
start
know.
getting
Yeah,
strategic. Yes.
if it's a nationwide injunction, then you don't have to change anything you're doing.
We're good.
But if it's
Okay.
not, then you may have to. So you need to be prepared, right? Because the other thing that the FTC rule requires is mandatory disclosure to both current and past employees, former employees, that the rule has changed, and it gives very specific language you're supposed to put in relative to notification of employees. Right?
Oh, so you have to send out mass
The
communications.
employer has to communicate with every single current and former employee.
See, I don't feel like we're getting involved enough, right? Because I feel like as HR professionals, we should be on,
Remember again, this is.
Oh yeah, this is the agency.
Yeah, it's an agency. So
it's an agency. I forgot.
It is illegal
to do that. I forgot.
To advocate to agencies. Yeah, you can advocate to elected officials all day. But federal agencies, no. That's why they do things as comment, or they do things by invited hearings. That's all super, super tight. So anyway,
or comment parties. Okay, so what's next? What do you want to? Because we have like the
Fair Labor Standards Act, right? So here again, I'm not going to talk about the July 1 deadline has already passed, and people presumably have squared up anybody that was paid less than the July 1 minimum. And the January 1 is still in front of us. Now, the one thing I'll comment there is there's still a bunch of lawsuits alive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's entirely possible that that a ruling may come out and said, hey, listen, that's too much money. Right? That's too much. And so it stops right here. It doesn't go any further. Now, the reason I bring that up is that one of the cases is sitting in front of Judge Mazant in Texas. And Judge Mazant is the judge that nuked the rulemaking attempt by the DOL under President Obama. Remember, that was 100% increase on the existing base. Remember that one? And Judge Mazant is the one that killed that. Killed it. And he killed it on the logic primarily that the increase was so dramatic that it basically obviated entirely the duties test. And he said, look, when Congress passed Fair Labor Standards Act, they put these two tests in place, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can't do something that completely eliminates the value of the other test.
That
wasn't Congress's
because
intent.
It needs to work together as opposed to
it wasn't Congress's intent. And so he said 100% just basically obviates makes the duties piece pretty worthless.
Is the 100%, is the 80, was that the 80,000? Was it that time? Okay. So then maybe update,
56. I think Obama was 56. I think it was 56.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So anyway, he's the guy that did that. So from a mathematical standpoint, if you look at the lift on the floor between Trump, because Trump's administration raised it, if you look at it on the lift of the floor from Trump to now, the employers, on the employer side, that would be a 65% increase of your base labor costs for exempt employees in only 4 years. So,
Hmm.
so Judge, we're going to see how Judge Mazant cares about. Does he think 65% is too much? Right. So we'll find out. But that's not what I want to talk about. Right.
Okay.
So we'll see when that happens. That's till January. We'll talk about that again between now and January. What I want to talk about is a part of the rule that no one's been talking about, and
Okay, let's talk about it.
that is the automatic escalator. Right.
Okay.
And so by the passage of this rule, and this also is being litigated, this element's being litigated.
Oh, okay, it is.
The
Okay.
DOL, yeah. Oh, there's more lawsuits you can shake a stick at. So anyway, but what this rule does is basically put future increases on autopilot. So what they plan to do is just basically look at the salary data every 3 years from southern U.S. and then make a determination based on that how much that salary floor will go up. So no more action by the DOL, no more rulemaking, no more comment, no more nothing. They just put this thing on autopilot. Now that's a big deal to me because historically increases to the base wage floor have been few and far between. Between 1938 and now, there have only been about 6.
1938.
And 3 of those attempts have happened in the last 8 years. So that just tells you how they just left it alone, right? So now it is, you know the data set that's going to be used, and you know they're going to do it every 3 years, which means any controller or CFO worth their salt is going to be able to use the economic data and be able to project where that likely lands. Okay.
What the cost will
be. And so, and here's the important thing to understand, because I'm going to have you put a slide up here in a minute.
Okay.
That floor can only go up or flat. It can't go down. All right. It only goes flat or up. And bear in mind, these are for exempt employees. So these are the ones that typically the business values the most, right? These are the people with authority and discretion, and they're meeting all the duties. I mean,
yes.
It's not handed out like candy, right? These are people who the organization's typically willing to pay some money to. And now you're setting it up so businesses are just going to have to keep on ratcheting. And you've also told them how to forecast it. And here's my real problem with that. So if you could put up that slide on wages.
On the wages. Okay, let me get to that.
That's
labor cost.
Yeah, labor cost.
Okay. Okay, and I'm gonna just kind of do it this way, if that's okay.
No, that's fine. That's law. Before that.
Oh, why didn't it? Oh, okay, there we go.
That's okay. Yeah. So if you look at this, I've can you expand that or go a little?
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna. That's what I'm gonna do. Let's do that.
Okay, that's okay. That's better. Yeah.
Okay.
So the first thing I want to tell you, this got cut off at the top. This data comes. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe it's at the bottom. Go to the bottom. Yeah. Okay. See where it says Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta?
Yes.
Okay. That's where this data comes from. So each of the Federal Reserve banks, the banks across the U.S. that form the Federal Reserve, each of them has an accountability for tracking different parts of the economy. So Atlanta, the bank in Atlanta does wages. So that's where this data came from. Okay.
Okay. Super cool. I learned something new today.
Okay. Very good.
Wow.
So you see the years across the bottom, and then this is where you see wages.
I'll take it down. Okay.
And how they fall. Well, sorry, this is growth, not actual wages, but growth, right?
Okay, wage growth. Okay,
wage growth, right? And so you can see here that we had the .com crash happen, and then wages collapsed, mortgage crash, and then the COVID recovery, which is a real peak. Okay, what I'm saying is now that this is on a 3-year autopilot, it matters a lot what information is in the data set. Right. And so, for instance, you could easily go in a 3-year period. So for instance, if a 3-year period had ended in 2002 and your salary floor went up at the very same time that the economy is collapsing, and with it, the wage increases, and quite frankly, people are being laid off left and right. So
Yes.
even wages themselves are dropping, right? Even wages themselves are dropping in that kind of environment, right? And if you're salaried, we all remember, right, after 2008, if you were salaried, you went years without a wage increase. Years, right?
See, yes.
So, but it matters a lot where the data is. So if the data had been captured at the top of the .com crash, then it would take another turn of the wheel, a second turn of the wheel, actually, for the next 3 years, the data set to then produce a flat growth for you. So you would get a growth indicator. Your data set would show growth, but in real life, in real time, it was actually going the wrong way. So that's what I mean. It matters a lot where this stuff falls, and it's very difficult to predict. So a real good example here, you see the COVID recovery, right?
Yes.
So remember, okay, we got to get everybody come back to work. We don't want to come back to work. We still have lots of relief money. I still got all my COVID bucks. I think I'll wait. Okay, we'll pay more. How much more? Okay, I think I'll wait and see if you raise that. So remember, that's how wages went way past $15 an hour.
Yes.
Right? And and you knew exactly when that happened, because Bernie Sanders stopped arguing for a $15 minimum wage, because it happened. It actually happened. And so if your data set includes the COVID recovery peak, then you've got a real artificial high, right? That's in your data set. And it can, once again, it could drive your numbers in a direction that is against what's happening in real time, right? So that's a real vulnerability in the methodology, right? As to when the data is captured. And so again, I emphasize, your best case scenario is flat. Your worst case scenario is, where am I going to get the money?
Exactly. You know, so that's why, and this is from the agency. So that's why, but it's really interesting that
this is from Atlanta. So I'm just trying to illustrate here that these things all happen in real life. And the point I'm trying to make that these fluctuations you see are pretty significant. As a matter of fact, you can see that wages in 2022, it went all the way till past mid-year, when they even got as high as they were during the mortgage crash. And it wasn't until the COVID recovery that we even got past what it was in 2001. So wage increases in the United States have taken an absolute beating for the last 20 years.
Yeah. Wow.
See that? And if we go into another hard recession right now, which is what I'm personally forecasting, you could see that trend line, that number, right? Because you can see it's trending down already now.
Yes.
Yeah, that's going to keep on dropping like a rock, I think. But
and then let's bring AI into the conversation and how that's changing.
Yeah. So yes. Okay, Chris. So what? So I understand that it matters a lot what the data series is, right? Every 3 years. Okay. So here's what I want to talk about, because the technology costs move very differently than wages. So go to the next slide here, because I want to talk about Moore's law. So Moore's law basically states that the number of transistors in an integrated circuit, or an IC, doubles every 2 years with minimal cost increase. This is what has allowed our technology to get smaller, right? So look at the computers back in the 1960s when NASA, right, was running the rocket system. Now it's Elon Musk. But anyway, when NASA was running the rocket system, they had computers that took up whole walls in buildings. And they were like 5 feet tall and 10 feet wide, right?
And now, right?
Well,
and now it's
nothing.
like
They're nothing, right? And that is directly a result of the size being required to accommodate the IC circuit dropping. And so this is an empirical relationship. It's linked to the production experience, has nothing to do with the law of physics. So basically, the transistors move at a very significant pace, and this allows functionality and performance to increase while costs fall. Okay, so what I'm illustrating here is that is a very different economic rule than this wage model that the Fair Labor Standards Act has put in place. And yet both of these things cost businesses, right? So go to the next slide to illustrate what I'm talking about. So here I'm going to show you, go up. I can't see what that is. Is this hardware?
This is the
this is from
producer
Fred.
price.
Okay, this is produced by, okay, this is hardware. This is computers. Okay.
Okay.
So you see where it says Fred up there?
Yes.
Okay, that is the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Okay, and their job is to track prices. So that's where I got this from. So the Federal Reserve banks are great for data.
So is this like HR professional? Is this like you know, just something that you like to do, or something that HR professionals could also think about?
I do this to advise clients.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. No, I'm like, whoa, I love this. I love this.
So
okay,
anyway,
go ahead.
So my point here, you can see, scroll down a little bit. So you can see what has happened with computers. So you can see for the first 8 years, so that's years along the bottom axis, right?
Okay.
So you see the costs, and this is the producer price. So these are the inputs into the computer cost, right?
Yes.
Producer price index are the inputs into the cost. So like if you're IBM and you're making computers, your inputs are costing you a pile of money. See that up at the top? Mm-hmm. That's your input cost. But you can see how precipitously the input costs fall. They fall like a rock.
They do.
Now, if you are a computer manufacturer, those first 8 years are your fattest margins.
Yes.
Because you are still able to charge a pretty high retail price for your stuff at the same time that your production costs are falling. So you have really fat profit margins.
Yes.
For about 8 years. And then the bottom falls out and it flatlines and you don't have any pricing power anymore. This is why HP computers cost $180 as a new model. And 1 year later, they're $100. And 2 years later, they're $95 with a 12-month warranty, right? So you just lose your pricing power.
Yes,
right?
Yes. All of this plays into it, yes.
Which makes it more affordable. Okay, so affordability here is my point. Next slide. So you can't really talk about technology, hardware, without talking about the software. So this is the software side. So the thing I'll point out to you here in this slope, so go up a little bit. So you'll notice here the slope on software is not as precipitous. You see, it just doesn't fall off a cliff.
Yeah, not like down, but it's.
And the reason being is that the first iteration of software always stinks. Like the first version of, any first version of Windows that comes out is buggy as hell, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And they have to go through, patch, fix, do different things, issue another version, etc. And so therefore they enjoy a longer profit tail, right? Their margins stay pretty sound for a good, 14, 15 years. So the hardware gets 8. These guys get almost 2x that. But you notice they still end up in this.
Yes.
So this is my point.
That the cost of
So go to the next slide. So this really illustrates it.
So and the top of that says key implications.
Yeah. So this is the key implication. This is a strategic thing. So instead of moving every decade or longer, the salary floor is going to possibly move every 3 years, and it's going to accelerate the gap between wages paid to humans and investment capital in technology. And when those two curves intersect, technology is a better bargain, right? So go to my next slide. You can see exactly how.
Right, because if we were just to leave it on this slide, it's a bit scary. It's just like, wait, what?
Yeah, exactly. So now this is my personal projection. Okay, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know for sure, but here's what I think is going to happen. So here you see technology, And in this slope, you can see I've kind of folded in both the hardware and the software.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
slope. See, I've made a more generous slope. So this is a conservative. This is conservative. It could actually be worse than this. So this is conservative.
Okay.
So you got technology costs following at the same time that the minimum salary is going up. And you can see here, I've just basically punched it up. So I've gone every 3 years and I've raised it gradually. You know, I'm not even baking in sharp increases. You know, I baked in basically only a lousy, 4% increase or whatever. The problem is those two lines intersect.
Yes.
So, and smart companies are not going to wait until those lines intersect to do something about that, right? And so the point I've been making to my clients, and this was part of a presentation I did for the Bloomington Chamber of Commerce,
Yes.
is that this is the strategic implication. So it's one thing if the Department of Labor gets a bug and decides, hey, every decade or 15 or 16 or 18 years, we want to do something to the salary floor. Well, you could live with that.
Yeah. Yeah. But 3 years.
They put this thing on autopilot, and they put it on autopilot. They aren't going to touch it. This is not going to be untouched by human hands. They're just putting this thing on autopilot and off it goes. And so what I'm trying to illustrate here is that model that they designed behaves very differently than technology does. And so in California, the real practical illustration of this, California passed a minimum wage law that raised fast food and only fast food workers, excluding Panera. Don't get me started, but fast food workers and raise their pay to $20 an hour as a minimum. And so immediately,
and excluded Panera. Okay, I won't get you in it. You said don't get you started. Okay.
So,
but okay, we'll talk about
the CEO of Panera is real good friends with the governor. So anyway, who apparently had nothing to do with that. Anyhow,
of course it's not that. That's not why. It's something else.
Like
something
I said,
else
I don't want to get into that. So the other people have said that, not me. I'm just repeating. But
yeah.
But my point. So what happened in California was, so bang, a whole bunch of fast food chains started closing, right? Because they were upside. They're going to be upside down on their labor costs because they couldn't pass the cost through to the customer. They couldn't pass the cost through the customer and stay in business. So
yeah. That's
to give you a real good example.
Yeah.
In my son lives in Burbank, California. If he gets a quarter pounder, I get a quarter pounder with cheese here. I haven't done it in a while, but I got to assume here in Bloomington, it probably runs around
probably $10. I feel like $12.
No, not that much. No.
Oh my gosh, I feel like it's so expensive these
days. No,
it's
like $8. In Burbank, California, he pays $18.
Oh, you're saying for just the sandwich, not the meal?
No, that's the meal. That's the Coke and the fries. But let's face it,
$8. Chris, I need to go where you're going to, because no, it's not $8.
18. Yeah, here in Bloomington, I think it's $8.65 for the meal deal. But at any rate, like I said, he's in Burbank, California.
Yeah, but that's a lot. $18.
Yeah. So what happened was the wages got ahead. Now, so what has happened? This has triggered, because this is what I mean by attachment point. So I use the term attachment point. That is where a trigger occurs, right? And so what happened in California, that put the labor costs in a situation where the technology costs are lower over time. So there's a new hamburger chain that has started, and they use a technology called Flippy. And everything is automated. It's basically robots in the back, AI technology in the front and at the drive-up window, and just 2 employees. One to take the burgers off the rotating grill and then follow the instructions for dressings on it, and that's it. They just have 2 people. One doing fries and shakes, and the other one doing the sandwiches. And They produce a hamburger about every 38 seconds.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now they don't
I mean,
have a
are
large
people
menu.
buying burgers every
They don't have
38
a large
seconds? But
menu. They don't have a large menu.
oh,
My
okay,
point
okay.
is they got AI technology married to the robots, right? So these are two different types of technologies. So they got a big kiosk. You walk in, it takes your picture and remembers your order. It even remembers your payment information if that's what you would like. So when you show up again and stand in front of this thing, it says, "Hi, Tracy. Would you like a double cheeseburger and fries again, or would you like something else?" And if you say
That
no,
is so funny,
no,
especially if
I love
somebody's
double
standing
cheeseburger and
behind you.
fries.
You're like,
Give me that. Give me that. Okay, you still want to use your same payment method? Sure. Okay, go to the counter, please. That's it. That's it.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but my point is that that is something that's almost impossible for McDonald's or Burger King to do. Not because McDonald's and Burger King don't have enough money to do it, they do. And not that they couldn't hire the companies that do this or that they could.
Mm-hmm.
They are not built to do that. They're not for that. And the point I'm making is that this business model, the AI and the robots are native to the model. So the conversion costs for Burger King and McDonald's are horrendous, just absolutely horrendous. And so the message I gave to the Bloomington Chamber of Commerce folks, and this is where it's important for HR, because I think HR's got to be an advisor on this sort of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
This goes right to it, because it is not about eliminating people,
That's
right?
right.
The bottom line of it is they couldn't hire enough workers to begin with. And as we've talked about on this podcast before, we have a declining population we're dealing with, right? So this is nothing small. But as an HR pro, you have
Are you
to
done with
think
the
about this.
slides?
Yeah, I'm done with the slide. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
As an HR
Okay. Just
pro,
so that you know, you can see
you
your
got
face.
to think about the implications of this sort of stuff. So, are we poised to take advantage of this? Are we going to be on the wrong side of this strategic curve? Because if you are, you're in a really bad competitive spot, and then the cost of reeling it back are high. You also have to think about, and this is what I was talking about in the presentation to the chamber, the business owners had to think about. Well, so look at that Flippy thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's only 2 employees that you see, but somebody's got to maintain those robots. Somebody's
That's
got to
right.
clean all that equipment. Somebody's got to maintain the AI. Somebody's got to maintain the technology bridge between the AI and the
Yes.
technology with the robots. And I'm sure that stuff all has to be updated. And I'm sure that code has to be
Yes.
written, because if they expand the menu. So there's a whole stack of jobs there that I can guarantee you right now, not a lot of people know how to do. And this is why I'm saying this is very similar to 1992. In
And what happened in
1992,
1992?
when I was practicing HR, the internet was being born, right? People were talking about it. DARPA was using it and everything. The government had it right first. But the idea that it would be available to people, email, right? Email was coming out at this point within years, but none of that had happened yet. But you could kind of see it coming. But my point is how rapidly it hit. In 1992, nobody knew who a webmaster was, and you couldn't find a job description for one from SHRM. By 1997, if you didn't have one, your business was probably up the creek. And that was 5 years. 5 years. It was 5 years from I don't know what you're talking about to, oh my God. So I have that. I've been alive long enough now
Just to experience that
feeling that I've seen this story before.
I love that you explained it that way, because I feel like that's exactly what it's going to take. It's not about like, oh my God, we're losing our jobs to robots. No, our jobs are just changing. What we're doing is changing. But I think if organizations are smart, because I think that this impacts smaller businesses, who may not have the funds to be able to be able to to change the way
Right.
that they've been doing business, to make sure that they're kind of looking at technology
Right.
so that they can be aware of those costs, but then start leveraging that so that you're hiring people that understand how to use that technology, so that you're not falling behind or having to close shop because you can't find people, because and I think it goes back to the skills first.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. So,
In my
like I said,
head.
there's huge implications here. And this is where I think HR can really lend some strategic value. It's nice when you can demonstrate to the executives that you're wrapping your head around this stuff, and you're thinking about what it means to the business. And by the way, don't be discouraged if you share that with them. And by the way, if you want those slides, if you're watching or you watch this later, if you want those slides, just email me or hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm discoverable. Then I will send you the deck, and you're welcome to use it. But do not be discouraged if you don't get a favorable response. If people say, well, yeah, that could happen, but so could a killer asteroid, right? I mean, don't be discouraged if that
That's
happens,
right.
because I can tell you, as an individual who has spent most of his career in this kind of spot, the first ones through the door aren't believed, right? Everybody in Europe thought Da Vinci was crazy. Nobody believed that the earth revolved around the sun, and most thought it was flat. So, usually,
Yes.
the people who figure it out are told they're crazy for a while. Don't get discouraged. Keep on reading.
Yeah, because we're going to be in this space where we are going to be called crazy. It's just like,
well,
technology. Get smart about it. Get
well,
ahead of it.
Yeah. The point is, I believe that you eventually will be right. So the only question is when, right?
Yeah.
But I think you're better off trying to get the business to think about these things, and it undoubtedly, I believe, will help them think about you in a different light as an HR pro if you're doing internal advocacy based on these regulations, right? Because this is all regulation driven, right? That's what you're doing.
That's right.
You're saying,
I love how you said that.
Fair Labor Standards Act made a rule. I've read it. Here's the big flashing red light. Here's why.
That's right.
Here's what's coming from the other direction. Here's the business implication.
Chris, I just love how you said that, because we've been talking about external advocacy and what that looks like when you're, working with your elected officials. But I think that internal advocacy is another key part too.
Super
it adds
important
to our business acumen as HR professionals to say, this is what's coming down the line. These are some of the strategic things that we need to start thinking about now, so it doesn't slap us. We can ride the wave instead of being crashed by it.
Exactly. And just one final thing, we're running out of time. I wanted to cover.
Yes, I know we didn't touch the presidential.
Real quick, the presidential. Yeah. So
okay.
As anybody that's picked up a newspaper, read an email, or seen the internet knows that there has been a lot of discussion about President Biden and his candidacy for president. So just a couple of things I want to clarify, because I've heard some really crazy stuff. So the first thing is, the Democrats have had their primary and he won. He is the candidate. The next bite of the apple that the party has for its standard bearer is the party convention. So Donald Trump is in the same boat. He won the primaries, but he's not the candidate until the convention attendees. Remember how each state stands up and says, the great state of Alaska cast its vote for that. So until that happens, you're not the nominee. You're the candidate, right? You're not the nominee. You're the nominee of the party. Now it's for real. Okay.
Okay.
So nothing can be done. There is no mechanism, okay, for anybody other than Joe Biden to be the candidate for president unless something changes at the convention. That is the time they have to do it. Now, separate aside from that is another thing people need to understand about money and campaign finance law. The President Biden has raised a ton of money for the campaign, as has former President Trump. Done.
Yes.
We all know it takes a ton of money to run, right? under federal campaign rules, that's their money. They control that as the primary victors, right? So they are the nominee kind of in waiting, right? How both parties do it. If President Biden is not the nominee, then the only person he could pass that money to, who was the nominee, would be Kamala Harris. He doesn't have any, if it's somebody other than her, that money cannot be legally transferred, which means if it's anybody but her, if it's not him and it's anybody but her, then that person's got to skippity fast raise $1 billion in the next 30 odd days because they only have 60 days to run for office. So
logically or
I'm just saying that I heard a lot of people saying, well, the president's got this war chest, the Democrats could hand that to anybody. It doesn't work that way with the FEC.
I didn't hear that.
The FEC, it does not work that way. Okay. It's not DNC money. It's the president's campaign money. Okay. So it's super strict. We're super strict about campaign money and how it gets transferred and how it gets spent in the whole 9 yards. I mean, it's heavily regulated, right? So there's that. The reason I bring that point up is because, let's face it, you need money to run. So
how does that? Go ahead.
It's a practical implication, right? For who else could be nominee if it's not President Biden. Now, the other way it could switch is if for some reason between then and now, the 25th Amendment is invoked. So
what is the 25th Amendment?
25th Amendment invocation is where the president's cabinet takes a vote and basically attests that they do not believe the president is any longer fit to serve.
His cabinet would have to, kind of take that up. Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't go to Congress. That's an invocation, right? So
and why does that impact HR? Depending on, because I know that there's a lot of HR professionals that say, well, I don't really want to get involved in that.
Because it matters a heck of a lot who the candidate is, right?
Yes.
So I can tell you right now, I have a real solid expectation of what we would see from a second Biden administration. I'm pretty comfortable with what would come rolling down the pike. I think I know that.
Okay.
President Trump was president just 4 years ago. I mean,
yes.
I'm pretty comfortable with what I would see there too. I think it would be a repeat of the same show. Maybe the tune a little different, but I saw that story already. So I have that. President Harris, I don't know. I don't know yet.
Okay.
I don't have a sense of that. Right.
Okay. Of what could be coming down the pipeline for HR.
Down the pike. And of course, that would be fleshed out in the campaign and all these other things. Right.
Okay. So we'd have a sense then.
Yeah. And former President Trump and his campaign has made a number of statements along the lines of things that might affect HR. But with President Trump, he tends to speak what I regard is as intentionally and directly, and rarely goes into detail and says, and that means this, and this. He doesn't talk like that.
So you have an idea, a sense, but not necessarily.
This way, he's been president before. That's why I'm saying I have a
So and both of them, you're right. Yeah,
I've had some time to listen to everybody and kind of figure out their communication style. Right. And President Trump and President Biden have very, very different communication styles. President Harris does too. Very, very different communication styles. So I'm just saying, I don't know, but yes, that matters to us in HR. That matters a heck of a lot. So all I was trying to do was clear up some confusion.
Well, tell us why. Because, there are going to be some people that, that some HR professionals who are so adverse to politics that they say it doesn't matter. So, if you don't mind just sharing a quick wisdom.
Here's the best way to think about it.
Okay.
So when it comes to the president, you got to remember the president selects the entire cabinet. Those are all the federal agencies that make all of the rules. President picks who runs the NLRB. President picks who runs the DOL. President picks who runs the EOC. You get where I'm going here?
Okay. Yes. Yes. Yes.
People are policy. That's why it matters.
Oh, okay.
People
Yes.
are policy, right? So over at the Department of Labor right now, they've got a head of the department. They got over at the FTC, over at the FCC, over at the NLRB. They've got people in that have very different ideas about how their stuff should run, and they're calling the shots. And they were picked by the president. That's what I mean. People are policy.
Oh, okay. Yes. 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 Yes.
The president matters because they are the one that picks who runs the EOC. And trust me, the EOC under President Trump ran very differently than it does right now. And the NLRB ran wildly differently than it did.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Under
yes.
President
A lot
Trump.
of this is yes. Yes.
So this is what I mean. Yes, it matters. It matters a lot. Now, I'm not telling you who to vote for. That's not my
That's
point.
Right. And yes, definitely. We're not saying that here.
My point is you can't ignore that stuff and say that you have your arms around policy and where it's headed and point of view and stuff like that. Because if you aren't, you don't.
That's right. I mean, honestly, I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm not talking about being political. As I've told you before, I don't have a partisan bone in my body. I don't wear a jersey when I advocate. I none of that stuff, right? SHRM doesn't contribute money. It doesn't have a PAC. The SHRM doesn't have a PAC, doesn't contribute money. We are not in that game at all.
Yes.
But we interface with it because politics is how policy becomes law.
That's right. Politics
is how
policy becomes law.
If you're going to successfully advocate, you have to know both, or you're just not going to be. You're not going to be effective. Well, incorrect. You're not going to be as effective as you could be.
You won't be as effective. Meaning, like you'll just be on the tail end of just doing whatever it is that the regulations tell you to do, as opposed to being a part of shaping. And being a part of that conversation.
You will likely have less influence than you could.
That's right. That's right. So, okay, because I know it's like 5:08. So
yeah, we got to go. We got to bounce here. So pleasure as always, Tracy, and greatly enjoyed conversations. And certainly by the time, let's see here, we'll be in August, right, for the next one?
Yes, August. So the next one is scheduled for, okay, there we go. The next one is scheduled for the second Wednesday in August, which will be, I'm just trying to find that calendar real quick. August 14th.
Yeah, there you go. Right. Yeah. Okay. So August 14th. And as we always know, as long as we've done this podcast, you'd be really surprised at what can happen in 30 days.
And yes, because August 14th, we'll have some idea, maybe some kind of conversations of what's going on. We can definitely tap into that.
Well, yeah,
I'm going to put on the.
There's never a lack of something to talk about, right? So
no, never. And it's always a pleasure to talk with you, Chris. I just want to say, just thank you so much for all of the knowledge and the wisdom that you share. Hopefully, people will come around and find their voice and realize that, you don't necessarily have to be like someone else, but what is your voice? You have to get involved because every person's voice matters. Cool. As HR professionals, how can we get involved?
Right. Very good.
Yes.
All right.
So, all right. So until next time.
Next month. Okay. Bye-bye.
Yes.